Excellent. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I am Irene Barry Kirika, the founder and executive director of Enable. Today's topic is understanding digital accessibility. So we'll give you some instructions. We've done our best to be as accessible as possible. So we are going to provide captions, live captions. At the same time, we are going to provide, we do have a sign language interpreter. We also have a Q&A box. Send your questions and respond instantly. The agenda for today will start off with the welcoming remarks, and then we'll move on to presentations and questions and answers. So for a very long time, students and teachers in Africa have experienced a shortage of Braille books and Braille paper, which are very important tools for blind people to learn how to read and write. To help solve the problem, Enable was founded in 2009 with a simple mission to empower the blind and visually impaired in Africa through computer-assisted technology. Over the last 10 years, Enable has established computer-assisted technology labs in special schools for the blind across Kenya and enrolled more than 8,000 students. We wanted to complement Braille while giving blind and low vision students computer skills and training that's critical for their everyday life. Giving the blind and low vision youth a chance to independently access information and participate in the global arena. So when we talk about digital accessibility, it is at the heart of what we do at Enable. Without accessible content, devices, products, and services, more than 15% of the global population is left out. Despite the fact that accessible technologies remain a luxury and a foreign concept in Africa, COVID-19 has forced most everyday activities and services to move online, creating another set of challenges for people with disabilities, especially when it comes to access to information. This dramatic move to an online life has had the unintended consequences of excluding millions of people who are now facing a different type of isolation, the digital isolation. I will now take this opportunity to introduce our supporting partner for this webinar, Christopher Martin from the US Embassy in Nairobi. Thank you.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. I know we have visitors from around the world joining us today. So it's a pleasure to be able to meet you all virtually and to join this webinar on a very important and very interesting topic. And it was a pleasure to meet Irene, 6-7 months ago now, I think, in Nairobi. And it's a fortuitous circumstance. She is friends with someone I work with, and he introduced her to us, and it's been a pleasure working with her. We had hoped to support the in-person conference here in March with help bringing some speakers and some American presence. The United States is celebrating the 30th year of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and which is landmark legislation that prohibits the discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places. So it's an especially important year for us to participate in opportunities like this, to engage in conversations about how we can all be inclusive and how we can make all of our lives accessible in order to interact and to really get to know each other, which is the heart of my job as the cultural attaché at the US Embassy. I was previously in Budapest as the cultural attaché, and we had a speaker, a wheelchair tennis player, come to visit, and we wanted to go souvenir shopping with her. And I thought of a few stores, and then I thought, I don't know if the stores have stairs or ramps or things like that to get in. And she said, don't worry, I'll spend my money where I can get in, where I can access. And that really opened up a whole new way of thinking for me about businesses and about accessibility in everyday life and in companies. And it was really, so I give a shout out to Karen Korb, if anybody knows her, a wheelchair tennis player from the United States. So it's a pleasure to continue that conversation in a different country now that I'm here in Nairobi, and continue it with a different group of people as well, all of you joining us today, and with all of the panelists, and with Enable. So thank you. It's a pleasure for the US Embassy, for my colleague Devin Glick and I to be participating with all of you. And I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say, especially from all of the YALI and Mandela Washington Fellow people who might be joining us today. So thank you very much, Irene.
Excellent, thank you so much. Actually, it's interesting because I remember when I came to visit the first time, I was very fortunate to actually find one of your programs for people with disabilities running. So I was able to meet people from different parts of Kenya. And it was amazing to see how passionate they are about technology, and how, especially because they live in different parts of the country, some of them have very low bandwidth, they're in low bandwidth areas, and they also have disabilities at the same time. So it was a great conversation, and thanks for supporting us. So I will move on to our esteemed speakers, who I'm very excited to have today. And I will give each speaker, starting off with Jennison, a chance to introduce yourself, say who you are and what you do, and then we can move on from there. Jennison?
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennison Asuncion, and I am greeting you from the heart of the Silicon Valley out here in California, where in my day job, I head up accessibility engineering evangelism for LinkedIn. However, for today's presentation, I am happy to be here as co-founder of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I bring greetings from Joe Devon, who is also a co-founder, who is unfortunately unable to be here. Global Accessibility Awareness Day is something that was started back in 2012. So we're in our 9th year. We can't believe we've come this far now, and it's so exciting for us. You know, one of the advantages, if we can find an advantage of this pandemic, is that we've moved everything online. So we can bring more people together who have access to have this important conversation about digital access and inclusion. The only other thing I'll say quickly is that for myself, I've been working in digital accessibility full-time since 2006. However, I've also been conducting research on the use of ICTs by college and university students with different disabilities back in Canada since 1999. So I'll stop there for now.
Excellent. Next, we have KR.
Hi everyone, I'm Ki Liu, and I'm the head of brand accessibility at Google, and I have an extremely unique role. My role is really to bring the lens of disability to the table and make sure people with disabilities are represented, and I help elevate the voices of disabled people in our product design, in our content, in our marketing, and for example, making sure that we provide resources and access for people with disabilities. On our COVID site recently, we made sure there was a section for people to access information. But my role is evolving every single day because things are changing every single day. So I've been in accessibility for many years. I'm a hearing loss advocate. I have severe hearing loss. And I've been in the technology industry for over 20 years, mostly designing hardware, but marketing is my passion because I love telling stories about the amazing things that people with disabilities do in this world. So it's great to be here.
Excellent. Paul?
Thank you very much. My name is Paul Mugambi. I'm a blind person. And into this webinar, I'm bringing a variety of experience. Like right now, I'm in a rural place where there is the largest minority of persons with abilities, or where the population of persons with abilities are, and sharing my experience as a disability public policy maker, and also both in humanitarian and development spheres. And I'm very glad to be here today.
Excellent. So we are going to go ahead and kick off the questions. And I'll start off with, maybe Paul, you can tell us, what does digital accessibility mean to you?
Digital accessibility, according to me, it means independence and having equal opportunity, just like any other individual, or just like the way other persons without disability, let's say the sighted, are and are accessing different application or different facilities, services, and products.
Fantastic. KR, maybe you can tell us as well, what does digital accessibility mean to you?
Yeah, I completely agree with Paul. It's about equality, having an equal playing field for everyone to be able to access information and opportunity, no matter your disability. But it really is also about like building with and for people with disabilities to make sure that we bring that knowledge, that what I call life experience to the table to help make the world more accessible and make sure that the world information is accessible and useful. And that's what digital accessibility means to me.
Okay, thank you. Jennison?
I was going to say +1, first of all, to what Paul and KR said. I think it's important, though, to mention, because people automatically think, well, digital accessibility is for people who have disabilities today. But you have the fact that at any point someone could acquire a disability or an impairment. That's the way life is. Things could happen. People are an aging population, and so just really reiterating what Paul was saying and KR said as well. To me, digital accessibility is designing and building technology so that everyone, including people with disabilities, can independently interact with it. So that's the really important point. I am also blind, and as an example, if I need someone to read to me a menu on a restaurant website because they have put it the image of the menu as opposed to writing it in text that my screen reader can read, that's not accessible. Similarly, videos without subtitles or closed captioning and will not be useful at all to someone who's deaf or hard of hearing. So it's really about independent access, as my fellow panelists have mentioned. But it is also for everyone, because by designing and developing for people with disabilities, you are actually creating a better experience for everyone.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think you guys have covered everything I would have said and even more. So that's a really good way to start off. And I'll go back to you again, Jennison. I have two questions back to back. One is, what is A11Y? And then in addition to that, you can jump over and tell us, why did you set up Global Accessibility Awareness Day? What do you expect of us today as we celebrate this day?
Sure. So to first cover your first question, A11Y or A11Y it's one of these short forms. I suspect, and I believe it came because of Twitter at the time that had that short, the number of characters. And between the letter A and Y, there are 11 letters for the word accessibility. So thus we have A11Y. So that's what A11Y is. Now, in terms of global accessibility, its birth. So the short version is that Joe Devon, who was at the time a developer, he was a web developer working on sites like AmericanIdol.com. He had seen a YouTube video showing Victor Saran, who was then at Yahoo, using a screen reader. And Joe had never seen someone using a screen reader before in his life. And he just became fascinated with it. And then fast forward to 2011, Joe's father, who is obviously getting older, was struggling using a bank website. And what does someone working in technology do when they see like things that frustrate them? They blog. And so Joe took his frustration at what he was seeing with his father to a blog post, and he basically wrote that developers really need to have at least a fundamental understanding or some sort of understanding of what accessibility is and what a screen reader is and all of these things, like and how to code properly. Proposed like we need a global accessibility day, awareness day to do just that. Now, at the same time, I was minding my own business back in Toronto, him being in Los Angeles, and I was very interested in figuring out ways that we could make accessibility something that designers and engineers would care about. So I took upon myself to start up something called Accessibility Camp Toronto back in 2011, and it was a free event for designers and developers. And so Joe published this post on some random November Saturday night, and I happened to be home in Toronto, and I was just trolling Twitter, and I got a tweet that said, this blog post had been written by Joe Devon. So I activated the link and I read his blog post. And between my interest in wanting to make accessibility more accessible to engineers and designers and what he was proposing, I quickly wrote on his blog post, hey, I'm interested in the same thing, let's talk. And we finally figured out time to get on the phone. We are both very busy people. We really shouldn't have had any business even thinking about starting up a global accessibility awareness day, but we decided to do it. And it was all very random and very last minute. And we were like, okay, let's choose a date. And we said, okay, May 9th. And then between Joe and myself, we basically emailed and made calls to friends of ours in our networks, telling them about this event. And honestly, we had no idea. So we ran it in May 2012, not sure what was going to happen. And then, there was some take up. We had some amazing support by our friends and running events in I think it was 16 cities at the time. And then, we started growing. We had to move the date because we found out that it was conflicting with European holidays. So at some point we decided let's just, instead of a date, let's just make it the third Thursday of May. But the real emphasis of this was, let's choose this day to focus attention on conversation around digital access and inclusion. Let's try and get the attention of people who wouldn't ordinarily be thinking about accessibility and inclusion. The average designer, engineer, or technology worker really doesn't interact with people with disabilities in their day-to-day work. So we wanted to change that. And so last year, I think we had over 200 events. Now at the time, of course, we had in-person events as well as virtual. And even this year, we had no idea of what was going to happen with Corona. But we have, I think at last count, over 160 some odd virtual activities and events. So that's really, in a nutshell, what global accessibility, the evolution of it, and that. The only other thing I'll say about it is that it's really become global with a capital G in terms of it's more than just an event that's celebrated in the English language. We have events happening in Spanish and French, and mm-hmm. We just found out that there was an event in China. So we recorded something and it was translated. So Joe and I at this point, I've kind of we've created this platform and we're just watching on the sidelines and getting involved in events like yours and reaching just new people and spreading the word about this.
Excellent. I have to say thank you so much for actually making it today, because I know everyone is trying to get to you, and I know you have a very busy day. So
Who can
I know
say
we are
no
the
to
first.
Irene?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we do appreciate you joining us.
Sure.
And as we mentioned, most of our audience is actually from Africa, from Burundi, from Rwanda, from Nigeria, from Ghana, South Africa, Kenya.
Wonderful.
So there are all these people, and digital accessibility is new to them. So for you to be here to even emphasize the importance of just celebrating this day and the fact that it's become a global phenomena, I think is fantastic. So we do appreciate you,
Sure.
and we'll keep pushing the message. So I'll move
And
on
I want to go
to.
Nairobi.
Oh, you want? Excellent, excellent. Nairobi is open, and we'll make it happen once we're able to host the conference. So
Great.
thank you. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for giving us the background of how you really started the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Next, I'm going to ask Paul to tell us a bit more about digital accessibility products and services in Africa. What do those products look like? What's the situation, especially now with COVID?
Thank you very much, Irene. With the COVID 2019, things have become worse in terms of accessibility of services and products. Giving an example of the banking sector, some of these services are not available maybe in the rural places, and one is forced to pay for more services in terms of going to the counter, because some of these services are not yet accessible. They don't have the accessibility features on the products, and sometimes you are forced to really do a lot of self-advocacy because of the systemic challenges which exist within the policy infrastructure, plus also that issue of the product themselves. Some of the features are not yet. You cannot hear me now?
Something happened.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, hearing
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, hearing
Yes,
you.
I can hear you.
Oh, no.
Hello, you can hear me now?
Yeah, Paul, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Paul, keep going.
Keep going.
I was saying that most of the products and services are not accessible, and more so in terms of even service delivery. You find yourself that being maybe in a rural place, most services are concentrated in the town setup, and many persons' abilities are located within the rural setup. And taking an example of a banking sector, whereby you have to go right there to access that service, and the online service, maybe the web services are not accessible. It's a major challenge. Taking another example is usage of transport. There are some apps or applications which one needs to use, but their infrastructure are not friendly as such, and you find yourself that they are not really compatible. Getting my own experience of where I got my master studies of public policy in Australia, I used to find myself crossing roads by myself using the application very comfortably, knowing the routes, knowing the direction. But once you are here in Africa here, it's another ball game. So you find that it's a big challenge, and accessing such, being independent is not really applicable here. You have to rely on others to assist you, maybe to cross the road, or you can be frustrated because like right now during the COVID-19, not everyone would like to, they are fearing to catch COVID. So seeing a blind fellow here who wants to cross the road, it might be challenging because one is fearing for his life, and now here you are now helpless on the highway. So it becomes a big challenge for many blind persons like me.
Paul, thank you for sharing that information. It's actually really interesting because I think what you're saying is without digital accessibility, there's a sense people have to depend on other people. yet you're capable to be able to move around by yourself. So
Absolutely.
yeah. And the other issue you raised is about the banking, and banking is such a private experience. And by having maybe the website or mobile money applications not being accessible, that can be extremely difficult. And I know this is an ongoing issue, and we hope that at least different countries in Africa can take on this to find out how can we have more inclusive. If you're going to provide any digital product, what can you do to make it more inclusive? Great, so we'll move on to this question will go to KR. As I mentioned earlier, COVID, and we've talked about this a bit, COVID has created another form of digital isolation. How can we communicate effectively and ensure that all media channels, outlets, including social media, are providing accessible information to everyone?
I think that the first thing to really keep in mind is to make sure that the content is accessible. Things like closed captioning being in video, making sure that audio descriptions are available. Also, when there's an image, making sure there's something called alt text, which just had a written description of what is happening in the image. Those little things make a big difference when you're doing anything on social media, providing any kind of content, especially when it's information that is helpful in times of COVID. But what's really important as well is to make sure that not only is the information accessible, but the representation really shows what disability looks like, right? Disability is incredibly diverse, different ages, different races, different genders. For me, it's really important that people see themselves when they see disability, that they see the intersectionality of disability and the diverse representation. So it's important that in time of COVID, we are seeing people, like Jennison mentioned earlier, you may have a temporary disability, and COVID has definitely impacted many people across the world of having a disability for the first time, or even identifying as having a disability when maybe they wouldn't have before. So this is an opportunity to really reset perception and really increase the awareness of people with disabilities and the diverse group of people that we are.
Oh, great. That's good. Good feedback. I think what also happens is that the one type of disability that's taken for granted is the temporary disability, whereby you can get sick for 6 months, you can't move, you can't get stuff done. And that's one space that anyone can get into at any time, even right now with COVID. So I think it's important for people to understand that right now you may think digital accessibility is not important to you, but you don't know about tomorrow, or a member of your family or someone you know. So it's important that we make sure all this information, there's a lot of COVID information that's going around for health purposes. That's very, very critical. But what's happening is all this information that's being circulated by governments, by private sector, and all that stuff is not accessible. So I hope we can all make an effort to try and figure out how do we make our information more inclusive.
Absolutely. And also, to add on to that, Irene, as now we're, especially where I am in California, and people are isolated at home, making sure that education from remote distance learning is accessible, making sure that if you're working from home, you're able to do your job and that is accessible. So digital accessibility is going to be more important more now than ever as we continue through this situation.
Excellent.
Irene, if I could just very quickly add on a positive note, once technology is made to be accessible, there are people with disabilities who might not have even thought that they could work because they can't travel to an office, because maybe there's no transportation, or the buildings themselves are not physically accessible. And so one of the advantages that I'm hearing about within areas of the disabilities communities is this is now providing an opportunity to open up new opportunities, because people can, we're proving that with technology, so long as it's accessible, things can happen from wherever, whether it's a village, I mean, so long obviously as you have reliable internet and things. But it is, the positive side of it is that, which is once we have the technology and it's accessible, it provides an even playing field for everyone.
Additionally,
No. Go ahead.
Additionally, I would like to say that when you get to involve persons' abilities, there's a lot of innovation and creativity which comes in and which makes everyone to enjoy the accessibility bit of it, whether you have a disability or not. And in case you get a disability on the way, you will have already been catered for in those innovations which have already taken place. So it doesn't, again, take a lot of time for you to be involved in terms of accessing different services and products. And from the experience is that the more persons' abilities are involved in terms of the design or the execution of these services, or not just as research people, but in the design, everything, it becomes more innovative, becomes at a higher standard, and many people really enjoy accessibility more than ever.
I think that's an excellent point, Paul. I've been in situations where I've seen products developed for people with disabilities, but the people with disabilities themselves did not feature anywhere, starting from even the product design or product development. They didn't even test the product before it went into the market. So it's a really important point that we need to put people with disabilities at the center of design as well. And my next question is for Janison. Who benefits from digital accessibility? This is really, really important because most people just think it's people with disabilities and it ends there. The second part to that question is, why should businesses invest in digital accessibility of their products and services? Is it really worth it?
So just to reiterate what we've all talked about is it's not only for people with disabilities and impairments. By building accessible and inclusive products, you're just making a better experience for everyone. You know, we often talk about the famous, at least here in the United States and Canada, we talk about curb cuts that were built, and those were originally for wheelchair users, but then people using strollers ended up benefiting from that as well. If you look at the mobile devices today, the iPhone is a great example of something that is inclusive because there's features in there that make it hands-free, using Siri, for example. But that's not only useful for people who don't have use of their hands, but that's also good for people who, frankly, are bad. They're able-bodied, but otherwise they just have a fat finger, all right? And they have trouble tapping on the screen. So using something like Siri makes it accessible to them. So all of these innovations that we've talked about for accessibility, many of them are useful for all. I'll bring up one more example. Folks like myself who are completely blind do not use a mouse. We depend completely on the keyboard to interact with the screen. So that, by making things keyboard accessible and operable, that helps me. But there are a lot of people, mainly power users, who would prefer not to even touch the mouse. They want to keep their hands on the keyboard anyway. So all of the stuff that's been done to make things keyboard accessible to people with disabilities help the power users be much more productive. You asked me a question: why should businesses care about accessibility? Well, frankly, part of it is a practical piece. There's over 1 billion people with disabilities and impairments out there, many of whom have money that they would like to be able to use to spend, and if your digital storefront is not accessible, you're shutting people with disabilities out. So do you really want to not have access to that money like everyone else's? Money is money. It doesn't matter if it comes from someone who has a disability or not. But by not making things accessible from that perspective, if you're a commercial website, you are losing out on the money that could be being spent by people with disabilities. And so I can't tell you, you know, I go to a lot of restaurant websites myself, and if the menu is not accessible, I'll think twice about going to that restaurant. Because why shouldn't I be able to know ahead of time what that restaurant is serving? If, for example, you, Irene, can go up there and view the menu. Similarly, for any other technologies, you know, it's all about, you know, who would want to deliberately exclude a segment of a population? So when you think about it that way, you know, when you're thinking about should you care about accessibility, the other question you should ask yourselves is, are you okay knowingly excluding people with disabilities and impairments? That's ultimately what the question comes down to. Are you, because accessibility is not something new. The first web content accessibility guidelines were published by the World Wide Web Consortium in 1999. So maybe it's newer in discussion now because more people are comfortable about talking about people with disabilities. But the reality is accessibility has been around for a long time. So it's not an excuse for people to ignore it.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. I think that's very, very good input. And I look at Africa, and I think that the various countries in Africa are at a very good place when it comes to digital accessibility, simply because our tech infrastructure is not completely developed. So it's easy to come in now and bring in accessibility or inclusion from an early stage, so that as governments and private sector companies are investing in technology, they're actually thinking about inclusion from the word go, so that they don't come back later to try and fix what they already have. And that's what most first world countries are struggling with, is trying to become inclusive when tech is so advanced. So I think Africa as a continent and the various countries can actually take advantage of this and sort of make sure they're investing in accessible technologies. So this question, the follow-up question, is actually for KR, because a lot of governments are investing in a lot of technology in Africa, and there are also a lot of great innovations that are coming out of Africa. Unfortunately, accessibility is being left behind. So my question to you, KR, is where should an organization start from when it comes to digital accessibility? What are the 3 things an organization should do?
Well, I think it first starts with, like Jennison said, thinking about who are we excluding by not making things accessible, thinking about what infrastructures can be put in place by learning from other countries and what we have done over the years that could be ways to implement things to make things more accessible, from technology to products to even things like infrastructure, like Jennison said, like people just need access to a building. Is that place accessible to everyone so that they can get in the door? And when they get in the door, is that still an accessible experience, right? So I think it's a tough question to answer because there's so many different areas that accessibility needs to be applied. So thinking about, one, just giving people physical access to things, but also giving people access to information. And I will say, even from product design standpoint, and this is something that we at Google are very passionate about, is building with the community, building with people with disabilities to better understand what are they looking for, how can we make things accessible for them. And by doing that, you're actually making things accessible for many, many people. And I'll give you an example. Even the internet was co-founded by someone who is hard of hearing, and he built it because he wanted to be able to communicate with his wife who is deaf. And when you think about some of the greatest technological innovations of our time, they were actually originally built with and for people who had disabilities. I'll give you another example. Text messaging, when it first came out many, many, many years ago, was for the deaf and hard of hearing community so that they could use mobile. because they couldn't talk on the phone. And now many people all over the world can't live without text messaging or email or the internet. So we have a lot to be thankful for the community really using technology as a way to access information. We should learn from that and build with the community and figure out ways to implement things. And then by doing that, you're really making opportunity happen for everyone.
Thank you. And thank you for emphasizing that people with, we have to build with people with disabilities in mind. And the fact that most of the latest innovations that we have today in the tech industry are actually because people were trying to address the needs of people with disabilities. Thank you. And they tend to benefit everyone, like you said. Yeah. So my next question is actually for Jennison. How can a business take the first step towards making their products and services more accessible? And really, what type of tools do they need to effectively implement digital accessibility in an organization?
I think if a business wants to start on the journey, and it really is a journey, the first thing you need to do is you need to find out what you don't know, which is how accessible is your most popular product or products. Where are they today? So it's so important there needs to be a commitment at that level. And the first commitment is a financial commitment to either to hire a company or an expert on accessibility to really come in and assess based on those World Wide Web Consortium content accessibility guidelines. Show you where are the current gaps. And so that's the first thing a company that has never done it before should be doing. The other thing aside from that is to start building empathy within the company. Start bringing in people with different disabilities and impairments in to talk about their experience, either using or trying to use their product or just technology in general. I find sometimes the most powerful way to build empathy and to gain understanding is to sit engineers and designers and product people and the chief technology officers, all those people, get them into a room with one or more people with different disabilities and impairments and watch them try to use your product. It's an eye-opening experience. You know, in my many years of working in accessibility, I think the most lights-on moments have happened there. So you have the two things. You have the data. First of all, you have the hard facts on where the issues are from a technical perspective. And then you're building empathy on the other side, because part of it is you need to win the hearts and minds of people too. This is bringing a level of change for many people and rethinking the way that they do design and the way they do development. So you conquer it on both sides. And then you do what you would do in any other case. You prioritize, you build a roadmap, and then again, it's a part of a commitment and investment. You need to put resources to fix issues, and then you need to test to make sure those issues are in place. You asked me about tools. There are so many free tools out there now that allow people to test how accessible websites are. Axe is a great one. The Wave is another good one from the WebAIM organization. Chrome has some amazing accessibility testing capabilities built in. If you use your favorite search engine and type accessibility testing tools, you'll be able to find a whole host of either free or inexpensive tools that you can use. The danger, of course, is if you start listing them, you're going to forget one. So what I will encourage people to do is just use your favorite search engine and just type accessibility testing tools, and you will find any number of those out there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think my experience, and I stand to be corrected, over the years has been, I've been more on the usability side, but I find most products to be more technical, like they're developed, designed in a very technical perspective. And then when you try to bring the product to the users, it really doesn't work. It can look very beautiful for sure, but the usability is questionable. And at the end of the day, I think people, businesses need to understand they are developing products for users, not for themselves. So it doesn't even need to look very beautiful. That's a whole different subject. It first needs to be usable so that then it can be accessible and people can be able to buy the services or benefit from the services and that people are providing. So my other question is for Paul. Can you share with us maybe one of the products that you use in Kenya or within Africa that is actually something that's African made, that's accessible? Do you have something in mind? It could be a website, it could be a mobile application, it could be anything.
Thank you very much. There are some two products which I've seen which are been made at least accessible for many persons with disabilities. There is an application which is now currently being revised by Riziki Source for employment of persons with disabilities, whereby one is able to input his information and being able to easily continue the whole process. It's a mobile application. It is for everyone, whether you're using a smartphone or even the lower end person, although the challenge might be for the phones maybe which don't have screen readers. But in terms of user, our application is very correct. Another application is M-Pesa, which is one of the innovation by Safaricom, which has been improved and many people are using it. And it is one of the products which has been emulated by many countries all over in Africa in terms of financial inclusion and also enabling our population to be able to use.
Oh, that's fantastic. Actually, I'll comment on one of the products. It's interesting to hear you talk about M-Pesa, and I'm really happy to actually learn that it's still fully accessible. Maybe 2 years ago, we actually worked with Safaricom, the M-Pesa team, on making the M-Pesa application accessible. And the one challenge that people are facing, especially people who are blind and low vision, they could not access their account balance, meaning that you can send money, but you cannot access your account balance. So what was happening is most people had to rely on their relatives or a friend to tell you what's on your account. And what was happening is that most people were losing a lot of money. So we were able to work with Safaricom, Enable as an organization, and we worked on the technical piece of it. We tested, we delivered, and we were able to make the product accessible. I think it's great to hear it's still working well. I know there are many banking products in the market. It's not just M-Pesa. And my hope is that the local businesses can look into their products and ensure that they're actually accessible so that more people can have access and be able to transact independently. So thank you for sharing that.
Just to mention a bit, it's also something which is a challenge to maybe to the low product phones, which are not smartphone, and because you find that before the smartphone era, blind people, we were having that challenge of not able to access the phones. So we had to have an innovative way of how I can access maybe your name and write it and transact an activity. But it's really a big challenge when you're not able to listen or hear what you are doing.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we'll take a question from one of our participants. Then this question will go to Jennison. One of our participants is asking, I want to contribute on an issue on education perspective in African continent. Like now when all pupils and students are at home due to COVID-19, people with disabilities cannot access the internet due to poverty. How can we go about this? And this ties to another question that someone has asked about saying that digital accessibility products are very expensive and they are denying most people, especially in the continent, an opportunity to access the most essential services. Can you please comment on that, Jennison?
Sure. Let me take that second part first. One of the innovations that's been happening of late is a lot of open source tools. There is a screen reader, for example, called NVDA, or non-visual. I'm going to screw that part up. The name, the exact name of NVDA, but it is called NVDA, and that is a completely free screen reader available in a multitude of languages. Now, of course, purchasing the computer is not. It may not be the most economical for some people, but you also have Chromebooks and cheaper phones that support the Android platform, which the Android platform has a lot of accessibility services available within it. I am not so familiar with how to solve for the issue of how to bring education to folks with disabilities in situations where they're in the African context. Unfortunately, that's not my area of expertise. I would say that, there's a lot of good work being done by nonprofit organizations. So part of it is maybe identifying, are there nonprofit organizations in your country that might be able to help? Because part of it is there are sometimes stigmas about different disabilities, and sometimes people just don't know. They might not even know to ask. So there may in fact be an NGO in your country that might be able to help out. But without asking and finding out, you won't know. So that would be my first thing to do, is find out that, because most countries, if nothing else, they will have NGOs that do support and advocate for people with disabilities. And that's, I think, the best first place to start for improving any part of the life, including from an education perspective.
Yeah, and I think you raised a very important point about the availability of open source applications. So I think that's a very good starting point to make sure that some of the products, if you're able to find products that you don't have to pay for, then that saves you some money. So I know on our program, we've used NVDA for more than 10 years, and it's been extremely beneficial in terms of costs. The next question.
By the way, real quick, non-visual desktop access. I just wanted to say that for the record.
Oh, thank you. I think we're so used to it, so we are assuming everyone else will. So thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
Yeah, fantastic. So my next question is for Paul. Most African countries are still very far behind in terms of accessibility. Can you outline 2 or 3 steps that would be critical in ensuring that we can start catching up with the rest of the world?
Thank you very much. One of the issue, or one of the steps which African countries need to do, is documenting the experiences so that people can be able to know the information, be able to understand the real challenges they are facing, the opportunities which are there, and be able to really get the issues there out. For example, on my side, I've started a program called Disability Sausage, a YouTube channel whereby I would like to be sharing different experiences of what people undergo in terms of these public policy issues, the involvement of people, and the digital space is also a good example whereby I can be sharing those experiences and what needs to be done, so that when a product or a producer who is intending to implement some project, they are able to understand such kind of thing exists and the opportunities which exist. Secondly is also the involvement of persons' abilities in the delivery or in the design to really help African countries. And also, lastly, is the area of policy making and representation, because you find that the policies are being made by different countries on accessibility, but that issue of, let's say, for example, communication authority in country X has made maybe a task force on issues regarding digital access, but there is no representation of persons' abilities. So you might find that is also it can be a major impediment in terms of African countries getting into really the digital space. And when you look at the multi-layer aspects of different aspects of the digital accessibility, we have really to look into how we can get these voices and not just that aspect of research only, but get the person's abilities in the point of start. And when you are really, if you can be able to do that, you really achieve the goal. And lastly, the fourth one is provision of having that twin approach in terms of dealing with issues of accessibility, whereby you can decide to produce a specific general product which is targeting the whole population, but in case you see that the needs have not yet been met completely for the other population, you can design a particular product. I can cite an example of how Microsoft has developed a gaming for persons with those who are not able to use hands. And it's really working very well because they are using their eyes to game. I found it very, very interesting. And I believe it's a part of a solution of having targeted product. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have one last question for KR, and then we'll have some closing remarks. So please excuse us, we'll go over time by just 5 minutes, but we should be able to wrap up. So KR, one of our participants wants to know, can Google customize the real traffic that we normally use for the blind to assist them in crossing and moving across cities? I was requesting this based on what Paul raised, that we don't have one in Nairobi.
I actually answered back with a question inside the Q&A to get clarification on what they meant by real traffic.
Okay, I did not get that. So are you able to answer any part of it?
I actually would not be the best person to answer that question because that's not my area of expertise, but we'd be happy to get more clarification from
okay.
the question and do my best to get the right information.
Okay, I have one last one then. Google has been at the forefront of advocacy for accessibility. What plans do you have in advancing accessibility, and how do partners like Enable fit into that? So
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit. Could you please repeat the question?
Yes, Google has been at the forefront of advocacy for accessibility. What plans do you have to advance accessibility, and how do you partner with different organizations?
So accessibility is incredibly important to Google, and we're always innovating every day in accessibility, from product to content. And we work with a number of organizations, nonprofits, NGOs, small businesses, education. Yeah, we are always thinking about accessibility. We're always designing with accessibility in mind. We will continue to do that.
Excellent. So for our wrap up, I'll give each person just a chance to say, what do you want participants to remember when it comes to digital accessibility in Africa? Because we're still very young, but we need to grow, and I'd just say something that will make them remember what digital accessibility is really all about. So we can start with maybe KR, you can jump in again.
I'm sorry, I was answering back Gilbert's question. Could you repeat the question one more time, please?
Yes. What do you want participants to remember about digital accessibility?
I want participants to continue to voice the things that they want to see improve. I want people with disabilities continue to insert themselves in the conversation, bring their knowledge and expertise of living with a disability. There's a lot of incredible problem solving skills in that. So it's important that we think about, like Jenison said earlier, making sure we're not excluding anyone when it comes to accessibility, whether it's the web or products, or even like he said, going into a restaurant and being able to read a menu, or even just being able to get into a restaurant. We want to make sure that you are thinking about everyone, because when you design for disability, you do design for everyone. So I want people to remember that.
Excellent. Jennison, what do you want people?
Sure, I want to address those folks who are at the end of they're the ones doing the designing or the developing or funding of technology. Africa, from everything I read, Africa is an exciting place in many countries. There are pockets of tech innovation happening that I keep hearing about, and so part of it is, you're trying to uplift your society and make things more modern and all of those things and make the lives of your citizens much better by building new technology and by investing in technology. And so again, why, like, you're here, you care enough that you're here listening to and watching this webinar. You need to take that caring back to the work you're doing, the designing you're doing, developing you're doing. There's guidelines, there's all kinds of help out there on the web to tell you how to do it. You can choose to ignore all of it, and then you become part of the problem by putting up more barriers for people with disabilities. Or you can choose to see this as a problem worth solving by making your products accessible and your technology accessible, and thus you're including everyone and you're making it possible for everyone to benefit from what you're building.
Excellent, thank you. Paul, the same question for you. What do you want people to remember about digital accessibility?
I would like participants or everyone to remember that accessibility is a right, and I'll just take it further and quote one of my songs when I was talking about shared space, which is an issue in the traffic issue, just the way KR has been struggling with that issue. We want to be equal, just like any other person, to be independent, whatever impairment or whatever disability you have, you like just to be just like any other person. We are not asking for extra thing in terms of accessibility. We're just saying that when you're developing a product, involve us. When you're advertising, get us on board. Let's be involved and let everyone or all persons enjoy the services just like any other individual. So that at the end of the day, everyone, what works for Paul can work for everyone, and we can now be able to create an equal, inclusive society for all. Thank you.
Excellent. So I want to thank all our fantastic panelists today. For me, even after being in the space for so many years, I still learned something new. So thank you for sharing your wealth of experience. And I also want to thank the US Embassy in Nairobi for supporting us. And I also want to thank all the participants for attending today's Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I hope you've learned something. The recording for this webinar will be made available on our website at inclusiveafrica.org. You can also sign up for our next webinar, which will be on June 18th, and it will be on web accessibility. So I want to say thank you so much to everyone. Please keep the conversation going beyond here. Have yourselves a wonderful day. And we are using the hashtag A11Y Africa and the one for GAAD, which is hashtag GAAD. And thank you. And you all have a fantastic day.
Thank you.